"Brian, please tell me you paid her." That was the line. The moment everything flipped. When the air got thin and the room went cold. It came out of Marissa Cheng's mouth like a bullet. Sharp, clipped, stunned. I wasn't even in the building, but I heard about it within the hour. Someone texted me from the boardroom. No subject, no context, just the quote. And I knew exactly what had happened. But to explain how we got there, we need to rewind. I knew something was off the second Kara started replying with one-word emails. We'd worked together for over a decade. She doesn't do yep and noted. She's the type to write full paragraphs in Slack, color-coded calendar invites, triple confirmations. So when I reminded her, politely, that my 6-year deferred performance bonus was set to vest this Friday, and all I got back was, "Got it," I didn't panic. I documented it. I've worked in compliance too long to let my ego speak first. Cordelia Ventures wasn't some plucky startup when I joined. It was a mid-market mess. By year 2, we were acquired. By year 4, restructured. By year 6, acquired again. Every pivot, every reorg, every culture shift, I stayed. Quiet, steady, focused. I don't do open letters or LinkedIn think pieces. I do clauses, frameworks, cross-border policy threads so tight you could hang a man's career from them. And some days, that's exactly what they do. Which brings me to this past December. Quietly, in the 3rd week, I sent HR a calendar ping. Final confirmation on performance vesting window. No reply for 48 hours. Then a vague, "We'll get back to you." Right. I pulled up the 2019 retention amendment, scanned it. There it was. Clause A 22C. Custom drafted, post-acquisition, because I didn't trust the new CFO to honor the existing package. Termination without cause within 30 days of vesting shall trigger accelerated bonus payout within 48 hours. I highlighted it. Saved it as PDF, sent a copy to my attorney just in case. Hey, real quick before we keep going. If you're listening and you're into stories like this, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe. It keeps these stories coming, and it honestly means a lot to the team behind the scenes. Most people don't realize how much it helps. All right, back to it. Now here's the thing about long-term service in a high-flux company. People forget you're still there. You stop being shiny. You're not the new hire or the rising star. You're just institutional. That makes you invisible, and that's fine, until you're inconvenient. Thursday morning, I walked into the office early. The air was still, coffee stale, conference room lights off. Kara's assistant stopped me before I even reached my desk. "Hey, can you pop into 3B for a quick chat?" Her voice was tight. I nodded. Room 3B had 3 people already seated. Kara, Brian, the new COO, and some HR woman I'd seen maybe once. "Thanks for coming in," Kara said, like she was offering me tea. "We just need to align on something real quick." Brian leaned forward, clasped his hands, did the empathetic executive lean. "Whereas restructuring ahead of the new fiscal year. Unfortunately, your position is being phased out." I blinked once. That was it. No incident, no performance review, no cause. Just a bullet point memo read aloud in corporate monotone. "You'll receive your final check by end of next week," Brian added. "We appreciate everything you've done." I didn't argue. Didn't flinch. I took off my badge, set it on the table. Kara reached for it automatically, like muscle memory. Then I stood, smoothed my sleeve, and walked out of room 3B like it was any other Thursday. But in my inbox, waiting in drafts, was the email I'd pre-written 3 days ago. Subject line, Clause 22sec, notification of triggered provision. Attachments, retention agreement, internal correspondence, time-stamped notes, and a legal letter from counsel. I hit send from the parking lot. By the time Brian finished his protein bar and moved on to gutting the IT team, Marissa Cheng had opened the PDF during a finance committee meeting. The room, I later heard, went quiet. Because Marissa remembered that clause. She remembered drafting it, with me, at the height of the post-merger chaos when they were trying to retain anyone with a functioning brain. She remembered signing it, and she remembered Brian, smug as ever, mocking legacy clause nonsense in front of the board 2 weeks ago. So she took off her glasses, looked across the table, and asked him flat out, "Brian, please tell me you paid her." He hadn't. The silence was louder than any answer. It started small. HR, usually chipper and fake busy around the holidays, suddenly became impossible to reach. Emails went from happy to help to let us circle back. Calls went unanswered. And Kara, who normally couldn't go 10 minutes without CCing half the floor on something, suddenly couldn't remember what day my bonus was set to vest. That's when I knew. I wasn't panicked. I wasn't even angry. I was disappointed. In the quiet, familiar kind of way that only comes when you realize people you've supported for over a decade think you're too polite to protect yourself. Mid-December, I sent a reminder. Just a small nudge. Hi there, just flagging that my deferred comp milestone is scheduled to vest on January 12th. Please confirm final processing date so I can plan tax-wise. Thanks. HR replied 3 days later. We're reviewing final comp schedules and will confirm shortly. That's it. Not even a smiley face, not even a thanks for all you do, which they normally throw around like confetti on fire drills. I checked the timestamp. Friday, 4:52 p.m., that late afternoon hour where corporate sends the emails they hope no one notices. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the file cabinet in my home office, third drawer, red tab, retention agreements. I had a copy of everything, not the PDF. The original paper, signed in ink. Page 6 was what I was after. Clause 22C in my handwriting, margin noted during the 2019 chaos. The first acquisition had just finalized, and the CFO, Rick, remember him, was trying to pull everyone's long-term incentives forward by rolling them into a future package. I knew what that meant. Vanish it now, promise it later, and 6 months in, you're lucky if they remember your name. I pushed back. Hard. Rick didn't like it, but legal couldn't justify stripping vested terms from retention agreements mid-cycle. So I worked with Marissa, yes, that Marissa, to write in 22C. Termination without cause within 30 days of scheduled bonus vesting shall trigger accelerated payout in full within 48 hours. I remember she paused when we added that last part, within 48 hours. Isn't that a little aggressive? She asked, pen hovering. It's precise, I said. You don't want interpretation. You want math. We left it in, and now, here we were, 5 years later. Rick was gone. So was most of the executive bench, but the clause, still there, still binding, still mine. I printed a fresh copy, highlighted 22C in yellow, stapled it to a fresh cover sheet, and wrote the date in black ink. December 19th. I added a screenshot of my email to HR, the one confirming vesting on January 12th, just in case someone got amnesia later. Then I went back to work. Finished the compliance review for a cross-border tax reconciliation project that no one else wanted to touch. Cleaned up the vendor attestation spreadsheet Kara had asked for. Responded to 3 separate Slack threads about the new SOC2 policies. I didn't check in again with HR. I didn't need to, because that's the thing about working in compliance. You know when a pattern's off. You don't need a whistle or a red flag. You just notice the silence. Kara started slipping too. Normally, she looped me in on everything. Upcoming audits, vendor risk flags, anything tangentially legal. Suddenly, I was getting soft-launched out of conversations. Meetings I used to lead became optional for me, then missing from my calendar altogether. It was subtle, intentional, timed, and honestly, not even original. I've seen it 100 times. In other companies, in other departments, it's always the same. A soft push to the side, just enough ambiguity to blur retaliation with restructuring. And always right before something vests. They thought they were playing chess. But I wrote the board, so I kept quiet. I finished my work. I archived every email, saved every thread, logged every meeting. I didn't mention clause 22C again, because they'd already acknowledged the date in writing. Kara had even replied to a team-wide message 2 months ago confirming bonus vesting schedules. I had the email saved, forwarded, time-stamped. They were building a trap. But they didn't check for tripwires. I had already handed my attorney the packet. We agreed I wouldn't say a word unless they pulled the trigger. And if they did, 48 hours, compound interest, and a clause they forgot. But I didn't. I didn't cry, didn't ask why, didn't even blink. You don't flinch when you already know the bullet's coming, you just watch it arrive. Thursday, 9:03 a.m. Kara stopped by my desk like she was dropping off a birthday card. Hey, quick chat in 4C? That's all she said. No smile, No, how was your night? Just those 5 syllables. And that brittle little voice, stretched so tight I could hear the guilt in the back of her throat. I knew. I grabbed my notebook. Not the leather one I use for team meetings, the black spiral bound I keep for HR conversations. The one with every date, every clause reference, every signature I'd ever been asked to just trust. Tucked it under my arm and walked down the hall like I was heading to any other meeting. Glass conference room, 2 people already seated. HR, someone new, mid-30s, nervous posture, and Brian. Of course, Brian. The new COO who started 6 weeks ago and already spoke like he owned the building. I think he still believed synergy was a leadership skill. Kara was standing by the door, pretending to fiddle with her phone. "Thanks for coming," she said, as if I had a choice. "Let's go ahead and get started." She sat, smoothed her blazer, smiled. But it wasn't her real smile. It was the one I'd seen her give contractors right before ending their engagements. "This isn't easy," she said, eyes flicking between me and the table. "But after reviewing organizational priorities, we've decided to restructure your role, effective immediately. No apology, no handshake, just a clean kill in business casual." Brian jumped in, like he was tagging himself into a wrestling match. "I'm sure you understand. This is standard across the industry, especially as we realign ahead of the new comp cycle. It's not personal." That was the first time I wanted to laugh. Not personal? I'd been with Cordelia Ventures for 11 years. I'd covered 5 departments, survived 2 acquisitions, cleaned up 3 borderline compliance disasters that could have cost them federal contracts, and done it quietly. No leaks, no credit, just clean systems, 0 fines, and a spotless audit trail. And now? Standard realignment. I said nothing. Just opened my notebook, tore out the top page where I'd written Thursday, 9 a.m. in neat black ink. I folded it once, slid it into my bag, then unpinned my badge and placed it in the center of the table. Kara reached for it, but hesitated. Brian looked vaguely satisfied, like he'd done something brave. "You'll receive your final check by end of next week," he said, leaning back, "and we're happy to provide a letter of recommendation if needed." That was when I met his eyes. Just once. I didn't glare. I didn't smile. I just looked at him for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for him to feel something shift. He didn't know what it was yet, but he would. I stood, picked up my bag, adjusted the strap. My voice never rose, never cracked. "I'll be out within the hour." Kara looked relieved, like she expected me to argue. I didn't give her the dignity. As I walked out, the HR rep cleared her throat. "If you have any questions, feel free to..." But I was already gone. Back at my desk, I didn't pack pictures or plants. I didn't cry in the bathroom or take one last stroll through the halls. I opened my laptop, logged in one final time, and opened the email draft I'd prepped 6 days ago. Subject line, Clause 22C, Formal Trigger Notice. Attachments. Signed retention agreement with annotation, screenshots of HR and supervisor correspondence, internal memo from October confirming final vesting date, and a 1-paragraph statement from my attorney. The language was calm, surgical, neutral in tone but legally loaded. I hit send. Then I closed the lid and walked out. Badge surrendered, severance promised, and a countdown already ticking. 48 hours. That's what the clause said. Accelerated payout, no deferral, non-negotiable. Interest compounding hourly after deadline. They thought they beat the system. They never realized I built the system. At exactly 2:11 p.m., Marissa Cheng stopped speaking. She was mid-sentence, something about cross-border capital exposure and Q1 currency hedging, when her laptop screen pinged. She glanced down, saw the subject line, and froze. There's a particular look people give when they realize they've just touched a live wire. No panic yet, just the immediate, unmistakable recognition that something is very, very wrong. She reread the email. The sender, Kenneth D. Halverson, my attorney. The subject, Clause 22C, Formal Trigger Notice. Attached, a zipped folder containing my original signed retention agreement, highlighted in bold, bright yellow, Clause 22C. Also inside, a 6-email thread between me and HR confirming the bonus vesting schedule, calendar invites showing internal acknowledgement, and a forwarded message from Kara, dated November 2nd. time-stamped 4:12 p.m., saying plainly, "Your deferred comp will vest on January 12th as scheduled. Let us know if any tax planning questions come up." It was all there. Marissa blinked once, then again. She said nothing. She just clicked to expand the PDF, zoomed in on the clause. Termination without cause within 30 days of scheduled bonus vesting shall trigger accelerated payout in full within 48 hours. She read it again. Then she took off her glasses. In the silence that followed, no one else in the room moved. One of the junior analysts shifted in his chair, thinking she'd lost her place in the deck. Another board member cleared his throat, gently, like maybe she'd frozen up from too much data. But Marissa wasn't stuck. She was recalculating the future of Cordelia Ventures in real time, because she remembered that clause. She remembered how I'd insisted on it back in 2019, post-acquisition, when half the legacy team was walking out and legal was scrambling to patch the dam. I wasn't the loudest back then either. I just sat in the corner of her glass-walled office, pen in hand, and said calmly, "If you're serious about retention, we need teeth." Marissa had pushed back, tried soft language. I'd declined. We landed on 22C together. Now she was staring at it again, 5 years later, watching the words boomerang through time with surgical precision. She turned slowly to the head of finance, whispered something. He leaned in, read over her shoulder. His eyebrows rose, once, then again. The junior counsel beside him reached for his iPad, trying to pull the employment agreement database. Too late, they'd pulled the trigger. I'd just handed them the bullet. Marissa opened another file in the attachment pack, my attorney's formal letter of notice. It was barely 1 page, professional, dry, but devastating. To whom it may concern, as of 10:03 a.m. this morning, our client was formally terminated without cause within the 30-day window outlined in Clause 22C of her retention agreement. This clause requires full accelerated payment of the deferred bonus within 48 hours of termination. Please note that failure to comply activates the penalty terms as detailed in Section 22D, including but not limited to. She didn't need to read further. She already knew what 22D said. Compound interest, hourly penalties, no grace period, no clause allowing for review. They had 47 hours left. The silence stretched. Brian wasn't in the meeting. Kara wasn't either. But Marissa was. And Marissa understood what this meant. Not just the money, though $4.1 million plus interest was a gut punch, but the precedent. The optics, the shareholder implications if it leaked that a long-tenured executive had been quietly let go a day before vesting and the company had violated their own agreement in doing so. The legal team scrambled. Someone asked if the clause had been superseded in a later amendment. Another pulled up the HRIS database looking for a conflicting entry, but there was nothing. It was clean, signed, still valid, and worse, acknowledged in writing recently, multiple times. Kara's email was a stake through the heart. The time, the phrasing, the casual as scheduled, it removed every possible defense. There was no plausible deniability, no ambiguity. They hadn't forgotten Clause 22C. They'd just failed to read the fine print on the grenade they'd just pulled the pin on. Marissa slid her laptop forward and said quietly to the person beside her, "Who signed the termination letter?" Silence. Then someone answered. "Brian did, this morning." Marissa's jaw flexed. Not dramatically, just once. A single visible calculation behind the eyes. And then, in that same steady voice she used during litigation calls, she asked the only question that mattered. Did he know? Nobody answered, because they all knew he didn't. And now it was 2:13 p.m. The 48-hour clock was already ticking. They didn't walk. They ran. The second that email landed in Marissa's inbox, the panic audit began. Every white-shoed associate and in-house paralegal suddenly became an archaeologist, digging through a half-decade of contracts like they were trying to exhume a legal loophole from the dead. It was almost funny if you weren't inside the blast radius. Marissa locked down a war room. Internal legal pulled every retention package issued since 2019. They were desperate to find an override clause, a renegotiated version, anything, a comma, a clause, a half-signed amendment that could invalidate what I'd just triggered. But Clause 22C wasn't a template. It wasn't a line in a boilerplate compensation appendix that could be hand-waved away with a company policy update. It was custom, specific, manually inserted, and worst of all for them, physically initialed by Marissa herself. There was a version of the file with her handwritten notes still scanned into the archive. Her legal team found it at 3:42 p.m., buried under the Retention Legacy Tier 1 folder. She'd circled the clause in blue ink back in 2019 and written one word beside it: enforceable. She'd meant it then as reassurance. Now it read like prophecy. The audit spiraled. HR was pulled into an emergency session. The head of talent tried to argue that perhaps the clause had been sunset in the 2021 policy overhaul. But the compliance lead checked the metadata. My agreement had never been touched since 2019. No updates, no revisions. It stood, legally, fully intact. They tried another route. Maybe I'd agreed implicitly to new terms when I signed the 2022 benefits recap, but that only covered health plan changes and WFH stipends, nothing about equity or deferrals. Strike two. Meanwhile, someone from payroll chimed in that they had already queued the final paycheck, but not the bonus. And if the bonus had to be paid by Saturday at 10:03 a.m., well, it wasn't in the system, and it wouldn't be in time. Strike three. Then came the real problem: documentation. Because it turns out, Kara had acknowledged my bonus vesting date not once, but twice. First, in a Slack thread from October when she tagged me in a reminder to finalize compliance review ahead of your bonus vesting on Jan 12. Second, in an email sent 6 weeks ago. Subject line: year-end review planning. Line 4: since your bonus vests January 12th, we'll get everything wrapped before then. 2 confirmations, both in writing, both archived, and both time-stamped before they tried to cut me loose 24 hours too early. It wasn't just a bad look, it was a legal admission. Brian, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware of the magnitude of the misstep. He'd been brought in for cultural cleanup, the kind of executive who gets hired not for what he understands, but for what he's willing to cut. He thought he was being decisive, efficient. A financial grown-up trimming the fat before the next comp cycle. He had no idea he'd just triggered a landmine with his own signature. But now, Marissa did, and every lawyer in the building did too. The board's risk officer flagged the issue internally as a Tier 1 payout liability, which translated from corporate legalese meant, if we don't fix this by tomorrow morning, we're screwed. The clause was binding, the evidence was stacked, and the payout was now on a timer. $4.1 million, plus penalty interest, hourly. They tried to find a wedge. Maybe I hadn't technically been terminated yet. Maybe there was a processing delay. Could they argue that the restructuring notice wasn't final until paperwork was filed? Nice try. Unfortunately for them, Kara had already removed my admin access. HR had already emailed me my Cobra packet. And my badge had already been deactivated at 10:03 a.m., meaning the 48-hour timer wasn't theoretical. It was already ticking. They had 19 hours left before interest kicked in. Brian finally got looped in around 4:30 p.m. According to someone who saw it, his first question was, why didn't someone tell me this clause existed? Marissa didn't answer. Because the truth was worse than a missed email. The clause hadn't been hidden. It was right there. Page 6, bolded, initialed. They hadn't ignored it. They just never bothered to look. And now, they were about to find out what 22C really cost. Friday morning, 10:03 a.m. on the dot, the moment the countdown expired. That's when a junior associate, second year, bright, over-caffeinated, the type who triple-checks page numbers, walked into the legal war room with a copy of my agreement and said 6 words that turned everyone pale. There's a penalty clause. It compounds. Marissa didn't look up right away. She was reviewing a possible back pay workaround, trying to stall the inevitable. But then the associate laid the page flat, tapped once, and said, quieter this time, Clause 22D. It activates automatically at the 48-hour mark. She looked, read, reread, and then the silence hit like a dropped elevator. It wasn't just a payout deadline, it was a financial time bomb. Every hour after 10:03 a.m., the company would owe an additional $7,400, compounded. The language was airtight. No discretionary clause, no reasonable best effort, no wiggle room, just a hard number, a hard deadline, and a hard-coded escalation. They had missed it by exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes, and now the meter was running. The penalty clause was written like a trapdoor. Back in 2019, when I negotiated the retention package, I'd insisted on it. Everyone thought I was being difficult. "We'd never terminate you mid-vesting window," the old CFO said. That'd be insane. And yet, here we were. They didn't even realize the compounding was hourly until the junior associate highlighted the calculation table embedded in the clause language. Marissa double-checked the math with a financial controller who ran the projection. If unpaid by end of day, $6,600 in additional liability. By Monday morning, $222,800 by the end of next week, north of $500,000. Brian finally arrived in the room at 10:17 a.m., still smug, still trying to spin it. "Can't we just expedite the payout now and avoid the interest?" he asked. Marissa looked at him like he'd asked if they could unsend the moon. "We're already accruing," she said. "The clause says within 48 hours, not upon intent to pay. The penalty's active." Brian frowned. "But I didn't approve that clause." "No," she said evenly, "but you signed the termination letter." Silence. Someone pulled it up on the screen. Dated January 10th, time-stamped, 10:03 a.m., his name, his signature. They had fired me 24 hours before my vesting, without cause, with written confirmation of the vesting date on file, and no payment initiated within the clause's limit. They couldn't even pretend it was a mistake. It was a case study in arrogance meeting documentation. Brian's jaw tightened. He tried to pivot. "We can renegotiate the terms. She'll take a settlement." Marissa didn't blink. "She hasn't responded. Her attorney has. And the attorney sent us this." She tapped the screen again. It was a single sentence. "All terms remain in force as originally filed." That was it. No offer, no waiver, no invitation to discuss. Because I didn't need to negotiate. I'd already won. Across the table, the controller added a new column to the liability tracker, live interest. They projected forward by the hour, watching the number tick up like a stock ticker from hell. Brian finally sat down. His confidence cracked just slightly. "You're telling me this could cost us?" "Yes," Marissa cut in. "I'm telling you it will cost us. Unless we pay immediately and hope she doesn't enforce late penalties retroactively in court. And even then, they'd have to hope I was feeling generous. They weren't just facing a financial hit. They were staring down a legal embarrassment, one that would have to be disclosed in the next investor filing, one that would trigger questions from the board about executive competence, one that would stick to Brian's record like tar, a long-serving compliance lead, terminated 24 hours before bonus vesting, with a clause they never read. And now they were bleeding cash by the hour. At 11:14 a.m., payroll flagged that initiating a wire that size by noon would require 2 CFO-level signatures, plus legal clearance due to the active dispute flag in the system. At 11:46 a.m., legal called the CFO's office. He was at lunch. At 12:22 p.m., the wire still wasn't cleared. And at 1:03 p.m., the clock ticked over again. $7,400 more. The building was silent. But the penalty... it was screaming. At 12:47 p.m. exactly, less than 2 hours after the 48-hour deadline passed, my phone buzzed. One new email. Subject, urgent clarification and request sender, Marissa Cheng. No assistant, no legal copy-in, no boilerplate signature block. Just her, direct, personal. I opened it. Skimmed it once, then again, slower. "We are currently processing your payout. Please confirm updated bank details at your earliest convenience. Additionally, if possible, we would appreciate a brief discussion regarding your confidentiality obligations and professional conduct clauses moving forward. Let us know a convenient time." There it was, the shift. "No, we're sorry. no admission, but every word carried the soft tremor of panic pressed into professionalism. The kind of message you write while a CFO breathes down your neck and the board asks how a mid-level departure became a financial hemorrhage. I sat still for a moment, rereading that last line. Let us know a convenient time. I imagined Marissa hunched at her laptop in a windowless room, legal pads everywhere, Brian pacing behind her, trying not to yell, the controller refreshing the compounding spreadsheet like it was a bomb countdown. Every tick of the clock draining another $7,400 from their books. And all she had left was this email, hoping I'd blink. I didn't. I didn't reply at all. Instead, I forwarded it to Kenneth, my attorney, and went back to folding laundry. There's something beautiful about mundane chores when $1 million check is crawling toward you in hourly regret. At 1:12 p.m., Kenneth responded on my behalf. To Marissa Cheng, subject. Urgent clarification and request body. All terms remain in force as originally filed. Nothing else. No warm regards. No call to discuss. No opening for negotiation. Because there wasn't one. They had triggered the clause. They had missed the window. They had compounded their mistake with delay and denial. Now the terms weren't just enforceable. They were alive, devouring interest, hour by hour. And I wasn't interested in giving them an exit ramp. They thought I'd play ball, that I'd be too polite, too loyal, too professional to push the knife in, that I'd want to talk, to smooth it over, to preserve the relationship. But relationships built on betrayal don't need preservation. They need documentation. And mine was bulletproof. From my living room window, I could see the sun falling behind the trees. I brewed coffee, let the cat stretch across the windowsill. Then I opened my laptop again, not for Marissa's benefit, but to start an email to the financial planner I'd been quietly working with for months. Subject: updated liquidity event, need next steps. Attached: my original compensation agreement and the compounding chart Kenneth had built for court prep, just in case. Because at this point, it wasn't about the bonus anymore. It was about what they thought they could get away with. That I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't have receipts, that a woman in compliance, quiet, thorough, invisible, would never have the backbone to hold $1 million line. They were wrong. And the best part? They were paying hour by hour for the privilege of learning that. Monday morning, 8:03 a.m., the doors to the 11th floor boardroom shut with a finality that said this wasn't a meeting. It was a reckoning. 3 chairs sat empty, not by accident. The investors from Ultra Capital and Rowley Group had pulled out of the call late Sunday night. No explanation, no excuses. Just calendar cancellations and one-line responses. We'll revisit after internal review. Translation: they smelled blood and didn't want their names on the mess. Inside the room, the air was already stale with dread. Kara sat stiffly at the end of the table, her hands folded too neatly, her mouth drawn tight. Brian leaned forward in his seat, clearly still clinging to the illusion that a strong voice and a PowerPoint might somehow fix this. His slide deck was titled Operational Realignment and Compensation Optimization. What he didn't know was that nobody cared about his slides anymore. Marissa arrived late, not flustered, not apologetic, just cold. She stepped inside with her coat still half on, holding a stapled document in one hand and her reading glasses in the other. Her heels clicked once, twice on the hardwood before she stopped just behind the empty chair she usually occupied. She didn't sit. She dropped the printed copy of my agreement onto the table. Hard. Right in front of Brian. The sound echoed. Her voice was calm, flat, and loud enough that no one could pretend not to hear. Please tell me you paid her. Silence. Brian blinked. Looked to Kara, then back to Marissa. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. The most honest expression he'd worn since he arrived at Cordelia. Legal was still reviewing, he started. She hit the 48-hour mark on Friday morning, Marissa interrupted. As of this moment, we've accrued over $130,000 in penalty interest, and that's before we calculate reputational exposure or litigation fees. A rustle moved through the room like a shift in barometric pressure. One of the independent board members, a woman from Apex Group, cleared her throat. We were under the impression that executive off-cycle terminations were reviewed with legal before approval. Was that not followed? Another chimed in. Why was a retention clause this significant overlooked? No one spoke. Kara looked down. Brian sat rigid, blinking as if he was still buffering. Then came the real dagger. Someone from compliance, not even senior level, pulled up a memo on the shared screen. Title: Avoidable financial exposure due to mishandling of legacy retention agreement. Employee ID size 761, redacted in parts, but not the summary. $4.1 million bonus, $133,200 in accrued interest as of 8 a.m. Potential litigation damages pending beneath that, a line in bold, cause, failure to review existing agreement, clause 22C, prior to non-cause termination. Brian finally broke the silence, though it was more of a sputter. There was no bad faith. It was a timing issue. Marissa set her glasses down on the table. Then, for the first time, she raised her voice, just slightly. No, Brian, it was negligence. You signed the termination letter. You didn't read the agreement. And now we're hemorrhaging funds we can't explain to our investors. That was when Kara stood up, maybe hoping to defend him, or herself, or both, but she never got the chance. One of the board members held up a hand. We're tabling discussion on all Q1 initiatives until this is resolved, effective immediately. Legal will initiate a full process review, and I'd recommend you both prepare a written statement. The implication was clear. You're not getting out of this clean. Marissa still hadn't sat down. She simply turned the agreement over, pointing at the signature line. My initials, right next to the clause, and your signature on the termination letter. The timestamps don't lie. Brian said nothing. Because what could he say? He had tried to play executioner without reading the terms. And now, with every tick of the clock, the company was paying the price for his oversight. The memo on screen refreshed. The interest line updated, $140,600. The meeting moved on, but no one looked at the deck Brian had prepared. Not once. Because this wasn't about operational realignment anymore. This was about accountability, and his name was on every page that mattered. The wire hit my account Friday at 4:11 p.m. No call. No email. Just a sterile notification from my bank and a legal PDF attached to a curt note from their external counsel. Per agreement, full payment enclosed, including interest accrued through 1/18. No apology. No breakdown. No, we've learned from this. Just a number, 8 digits, followed by a clause reference and a signature. That's the language they finally understood. Payment. They'd tried to bluff their way around it. Delay, distract, spin it internally as a contractual gray area. But money doesn't lie. And contracts, when written properly, don't forget. You can ignore a person. You can talk around a decision. But you can't talk over a clause that's been signed, time-stamped, archived, and notarized. They knew that now. The settlement didn't come with an NDA that had been part of the negotiation. They tried, of course. But Kenneth sent them a 3-word reply that sealed it. Clause already governs. Meaning everything was already locked down. No need for new terms, no gag orders, no backroom revisions. I didn't need to say a word. The agreement spoke louder than I ever could. By Monday, Cordelia Ventures posted a bland internal announcement. As part of our strategic evolution, we're realigning several leadership roles to better position the firm for sustainable growth. Translation: someone had to fall on the sword. Brian's LinkedIn went dark 2 days later. Kara's calendar was wiped before Q2. The controller who flagged the compounding interest took over interim operations, and quietly, without press, without ceremony, the entire executive comp review committee was restructured under direct board oversight. But the best part? It came in April, buried deep in a shareholder disclosure, page 87 of the quarterly filing in an appendix almost no one reads. Right beneath a line about executive compensation anomalies and performance-adjusted settlements was one single sentence. Settlement executed per clause 22C, effective retroactively. No name, no amount, no commentary. But there it was, in legal ink. On public record. Not because I demanded it, because the clause did. I didn't post about it, didn't share screenshots or fire off a dramatic goodbye message to the company Slack. I just printed the disclosure, clipped it to the back of my original retention agreement, and filed it with a quiet satisfaction. Not every win needs volume. Some wins arrive like wire transfers, precise, private, Irreversible. They thought I was the invisible one, the back office name, the quiet woman in compliance whose job was to clean messes, not make waves. But they forgot. I wasn't cleaning messes. I was documenting futures. And when they made me one of their problems, I became the clause they couldn't ignore. They fired me on a Thursday. I was paid by Friday. And every tick of that clock, every dollar of interest was just a line from a document they never bothered to read. No voice was raised, but every clause was heard.